Racism. Racism. Racism is the belief that groups of humans possess different behavioral traits corresponding to physical appearance and can be divided based on the superiority of one race over another, according to the encyclopedia. It may also mean prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against other people because they are of a different race or ethnicity. Modern variants of racism are often based in social perceptions of biological differences between peoples. These views can take the form of social actions, practices, or beliefs, or political systems in which different races are ranked as inherently superior or inferior to each other based on presumed shared inheritable traits, abilities, or qualities. In terms of political systems that support the expression of prejudice or aversion in discriminatory practices or laws, racist ideology may include associated social aspects such as nativism, xenophobia, otherness, segregation, hierarchical ranking, and supremacism. While the concepts of race and ethnicity are considered to be separate in contemporary social science, the two terms have a long history of equivalence in popular usage and older social science literature. Ethnicity is often used in a sense close to one traditionally attributed to race, the division of human groups based on qualities assumed to be essential or innate to the group, for example, shared ancestry or shared behavior. Therefore, racism and racial discrimination are often used to describe discrimination on an ethnic or cultural basis, independent of whether these differences are described as racial. According to the United Nations Convention on Racial Discrimination, there is no distinction between the terms racial and ethnic discrimination. The UN Convention further concludes that superiority based on racial differentiation is scientifically false, morally condemnable, socially unjust, and dangerous. The convention also declared that there is no justification for racial discrimination anywhere in theory or in practice, according to the encyclopedia. Racism is a relatively modern concept, arising in the European age of imperialism, the subsequent growth of capitalism, and especially the Atlantic slave trade, of which it was a major driving force. It was also a major force behind racial segregation, especially in the United States in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and South Africa under apartheid. 19th and 20th century racism in Western culture is particularly well documented and constitutes a reference point in studies and discourses about racism. Racism has played a role in genocides such as the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, and genocide of Serbs, and the colonial projects, including the European colonization of the Americas, Africa, and Asia, as well as the Soviet deportations of indigenous minorities. Indigenous people have been and are often subject to racist attitudes. Read about the definition and usage. In the 19th century, many scientists subscribed to the belief that the human population can be divided into races. The term racism is a noun describing the state of being racist, describing to the belief that the human population can or should be classified into races with differential abilities and dispositions, which in turn may motivate a political ideology in which rights and privileges are differentially distributed based on racial categories. Read all about that. Today, most biologists, anthropologists, and sociologists reject a taxonomy of races in favor of more specific and/or empirically verifiable criteria such as geography, ethnicity, or a history of endogamy. To date, there is little evidence in human genome research which indicates that race can be defined in such a way as to be useful in determining a genetic classification of humans, according to the encyclopedia. Read all about that. Legal. Though many countries around the globe have passed laws related to race and discrimination, the first significant international human rights instrument developed by the United Nations was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights recognizes that if people are to be treated with dignity, they require economic rights, social rights, including education, and the rights to cultural and political participation and civil liberty. It further states that everyone is entitled to these rights without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. The UN does not define racism, however. It does define racial discrimination. According to the 1965 UN International Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the term racial discrimination shall mean, by distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin that has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal footing of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, or any other field of public life. In their 1978 United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization Declaration on Race and Racial Prejudice, the United Nations states, all human beings belong to a single species and are descended from a common stock that are born equal in dignity and rights and all form of internal part of humanity. The UN definition of racial discrimination does not make any distinction between discrimination based on ethnicity and race, in part because the distinction between the two has been a matter of debate among academics, including anthropologists. Similarly, in British law, the phrase racial group means any group of people who are defined by reference to their race, color, nationality, including citizenship or ethnic or national origin. In Norway, the word race has been removed from national laws concerning discrimination because the use of the phrase is considered problematic and unethical. The Norwegian Anti-Discrimination Act bans discrimination based on ethnicity, national origin, descent, and skin color. Social and behavioral sciences. Sociologists in general recognize race as a social construct. This means that although the concept of race and racism are based on observable biological characteristics, any conclusion drawn about race on the basis of those observations are heavily influenced by cultural ideologies. Racism as an ideology exists in society at both the individual and institutional level. Read all about that. Humanities. Language, linguistics, and discourse are active areas of study in the humanities, along with literature and the arts. Discourse analysis seeks to reveal the meaning of race and the actions of racists through careful study of the ways in which these factors of human society are described and discussed in various written and oral works. Read all about that. Popular usage. According to dictionaries, the word is commonly used to describe prejudice and discrimination based on race. Aspects. Aversive racism. Wait a minute. Aversive racism is a form of implicit racism in which a person's unconscious negative evaluations of racial or ethnic minorities are realized by persistent avoidance of interaction with other racial and ethnic groups. Read about that. Color blindness. In relation to racism, color blindness is the disregard of racial characteristics in social interaction, for example, in the rejection of affirmative action as a way to address the results of past patterns of discrimination. Critics of this attitude argue that by refusing to attend to racial disparities, racial color blindness in fact unconsciously perpetuates the patterns that produce racial inequality, according to the encyclopedia. Cultural racism. Cultural racism manifests as societal beliefs and customs that promote the assumption that the products of a given culture, including the language and traditions of that culture, are superior to those of other cultures. Read about that. Economic. Historical, economic, or social disparity is alleged to be a form of discrimination caused by past racism and historical reasons affecting the present generation through deficits in the formal education and kinds of preparation previous generations, and through primarily unconscious racist attitudes and actions on members of the general population. Institutional racism, also known as structural racism, state racism, or systemic racism, is racial discrimination by governments, corporations, religions, or educational institutions, or other large organizations with the power to influence the lives of many individuals. Read all about that. Othering. Othering is the term used by some to describe a system of discrimination whereby the characteristics of a group are used to distinguish them as separate from the norm. Racial discrimination refers to discrimination against someone on the basis of their race. Racial segregation. Racial segregation is the separation of humans into socially constructed racial groups in daily life. It may apply to activities such as eating in a restaurant, drinking from a water fountain, using a bathroom, attending school, going to movies, or in the rental or purchase of a home. Supremacism. Centuries of European centuries of European colonialism in the Americas, Africa, and Asia were often justified by white supremacist attitudes. Read all about that. Symbolic modern. Some scholars argue that in the US, earlier violent and aggressive forms of racism have evolved into a more subtle form of prejudice in the late 20th century. Subconscious biases. Recent research has shown that individuals who consciously claim to reject racism may still exhibit race-based subconscious biases in their decision-making processes. International law on racial discrimination. Read all about that. Ideology. Racism existed during the 19th century as scientific racism, which attempted to provide a racial classification of humanity. Read all about that. Ethnicity and ethnic conflicts. Debates over the origins of racism often suffer from a lack of clarity over the term. Read about xenophobia and ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism. Tough to pronounce that word. Read all about it. Ethnic and racial nationalism. History, ethnocentrism, and proto-racism. 19th century, 20th century, contemporary. Scientific racism. The modern biological definition of race developed in the 19th century with scientific racist theories. Read all about those. Heredity and eugenics, polygenism and racial typologies, human zoos, theories about the origins of racism, state-sponsored racism, anti-racism. Anti-racism includes beliefs, actions, movements, and policies which are adopted or developed in order to oppose racism. Read all about racism. Racism. Racism.